ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ನನ್ನ ಹೆಸರು ಸಿಂಧು ಮಂಜೇಶ್. ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದಾಗೆ ನಾನು ಹುಟ್ಟು ಬೆಳೆದಿದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಮೈಸೂರಿನಲ್ಲಿ, ಬಟ್ ಅರ್ಧ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ಹತ್ತಿ ನಾನು. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ತಾಯಿ ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ತಾಯಿಯ ಫುಲ್ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿ ಮಂಗಳೂರಿನವರು. ನಾನು ಹುಟ್ಟು ಬೆಳೆದಿದ್ದು ಮೈಸೂರಿನವಳು. ಕನ್ನಡ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಓದ್ತೀನಿ, ಬರಿತೀನಿ, ಬಟ್ ನನ್ನ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಷನಲ್ ವರ್ಲ್ಡಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಸೊ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಕ್ಷಮಿಸಿ ನನ್ನ. ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸ್ ನನಗೆ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಈ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ ಡೆಲಿವರ್ ಬರ್ತೀಯಾ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದಾಗ ನಾನು ಇಮಿಡಿಯೇಟಾಗಿ ಎಸ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದೆ. ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಮೈ ಆನರ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಹಿಯರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಅ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ at a university as an educator, but more importantly in honor of Srimati P.P. Gomati, who is a visionary, a legend, and person who worked for public service, especially for empowerment of women and women's education. So I'm humbled to be here to deliver a lecture which is being held in her name and in her memory. So thank you, sir. So thank you all, most importantly, for being here. I will not prolong a lecture. This is not a classroom. So for the students here, don't worry, it's not going to be like another lecture after which you have another assignment and that you have to go and you have to prepare. I just want to share some thoughts for you. I'm not speaking here as any kind of an expert. I'm speaking here as someone who's worked in the industry for some time, knows the ins and outs a little more because I've been in the industry, not because nange daiva gnana ide anta alla. So I just wanted to share some of my ideas, thoughts and observations with you. So and after which we can have a question and answer and discussion. I think the topic today is something which is very, very relevant and close to my heart. I started my career as a journalist in India. After about 10 plus years, I quit active journalism and switched to teaching journalism. So I quit active journalism. I went to the US. I got my PhD in communication there to enable me to teach. And then I was teaching journalism there for 5 plus years before I moved back to India. So now I'm back in India for good after many years there. And it is always good to be back home and interact with people. So it's apt that I'm going to be talking today about Indian media, where I started my career and which I am still very much invested in, and which is also so important in these times, in our day, with so much of chaos going around in our public lives, in the public and society. So much of information, misinformation, deep fake, too many words that are being thrown at us. But what does this overall mean for us as a society, and why is it important for us to engage with it or to even be interested about it? We can just say, oh, it's happening there, it doesn't affect my life. No, it does affect all of our lives, whether it is direct or indirect, and which is why I am very passionate about this topic. So without much ado, I will share some of my thoughts with you. So very often we hear terms like media, news media, journalism, public interest. So I'll start at the very basics of what we are here for today, which is like news media in India. What is the news media? The news media has a significant role to play in curating shared knowledge in society. I emphasize curating shared knowledge. The media does not produce knowledge. The media simply curates what knowledge already is there and then shares it for common consumption in society. It is not a private party between one person to another person. Oh, I have got this, I'm going to trade it with you. No, it is for public interest. It is for public commons. It's for knowledge which is already out there. Media professionals are not scientists who do original discoveries, nor are they philosophers who come up with a new concept. They curate the knowledge which we all share and then mediate it to disseminate it to further people. By seeking to disseminate information that people want, need, and should know, news organizations both circulate and shape knowledge. Media products allow geographically dispersed people to have some awareness about the other's conditions, helping create a collective consciousness. We can be in Mangalore, we can be in Mysore, we can be in Bangalore, we can be in California, or we can be in Africa. and live in our own little worlds without caring about what is happening elsewhere, except for, talking to our families on WhatsApp or, on a personal level. But we do need to know what is going on in other parts of the world, because we are, as we say in Sanskrit, aham brahmasmi, we are all part of the same cosmos. Our immediate concerns, our immediate geography, our immediate culture might differ, but at the end of the day, we are all human beings who share the same fears, the same hopes, the same challenges, and same systems of governance in most places, if it's a democracy. If it's not a democracy, there's other forms of governance. But we all collect ourselves as society. None of us live as individuals and can claim that we live, I'm an island and I will be like this. Why do we care about what is going on somewhere else? And who is the person who kind of brings that to us? It is the media, and that's where media and its responsibility and its role in society comes in. So if news is knowledge, not just information, I emphasize that. News is not just information. It is not just what comes in the newspaper in the morning for us to read and say, oh, this is happening, goes to Hale Dabba Kali Shisha. No, it's information which we process, which becomes part of our knowledge about something, shapes our opinion about a certain issue, becomes a frame of reference that we use when we go and cast our vote in an election. It's knowledge that we gather and knowledge that is handed over from person to person and knowledge that is shared between people of a society. So if news is considered as knowledge, then we must consider the archaeology of knowledge. How is it constructed? How is it shared? And how is it mediated? To explore the construction of news is to ask questions about how reality is constructed, the professional norms of sourcing and storytelling establish expectations for journalists and audiences about how to represent the world. One must then account for the economic, social, organizational, and technological factors that influence the construction of news. I'll come back to that point because I think it's a very important point and explain that a little further. Such inquiries are characterized by their sociological inclinations. That is, they seek to interrogate and understand this nature of certain patterns of human behavior and phenomenon in society. In the traditional sociological approach to news, its definitions are dependent on social structures, which is news reflects society. ಏನಾಗ್ತಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನು ತೋರಿಸ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. Is that real? Is that true? Is that what reality is all about? Are news organizations just reflecting what is happening in society? Or are they putting out ideas there which influence and shape society? Is it a two-way dialogue or is it a one-way mirror? It's something that we need to think about very carefully. The latter interpretative sociological approach emphasizes the work of journalists and news outlets. News does not just mirror society. It helps construct and constitute a shared social phenomenon. To say that a newspaper and a news organization or a television channel or anything is just ಏನಾಗ್ತಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನು ತೋರಿಸ್ತಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಅಷ್ಟಪ್ಪ, ನಾವೇನು ಹೇಳ್ತಿಲ್ಲ, ನಾವೇನು ಮಾಡ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. That's the biggest lie that we can tell ourselves. Because a lot of times what is out there is something that is being consciously constructed and put out there, which we unconsciously consume and then think of it as reality. Which therefore brings us again to the point of what is our role as consumers of news. We are not passive people. We are not people who just sit there and say, that's what's happening and that's what I'm reacting to. Really? Are we thinking what is being told to us? Are we questioning? Are we asking where the source is? So again, this is another point that I want to come back to in terms of our role as consumers of news, not just as passive audiences of news. I want to shift a little here to talk about. So I've laid out the ground about how I'm going to approach what the news media is, what news organizations are. So I want to lay out the approach for the next point that I want to, these are the two foundations that I want to then explore a little further with specific relation to India. What is journalism? Is it just the job of going and collecting and reporting and putting out the news? Is journalism sitting in a studio and having a debate with 5 panelists every night at 9 o'clock? Very often these days it's not a debate, it is like a shouting match, which we all kind of, shouting match is a polite way of putting it. Most often it's a circus. So is it a discussion? Is it a debate? Is it a shouting match? Are we getting anything out of it? Is that journalism? What is journalism? So we have to kind of go back to the antecedents of how journalism started. What was it for? What was its role in society? And all of you students sitting there, you're going to be journalists tomorrow. So I think it's important for us to kind of have the discussion about what are you studying? What are you studying to become? What are you studying to do? What do you see your role in society as? So journalism is popularly called the fourth estate in democracy, serving the function of a social institution while simultaneously striving for professional status among other occupations in society since the 1800s. Again, please note, it's a social institute. It's not a private enterprise. It's a very clear distinction that we need to make. Commercial media is commercial media. There's nothing wrong with it, but it serves a social function. It's not there merely for the, it's not a product that you're selling. It's a social function that you're doing. Yes, you make your profits. Any industry has to survive. It has to make its profits. But where does profit end and profiteering begin? It's a question that we have to ask ourselves. Are you selling toothpaste or are you selling a public good which people will use and therefore then shape how we behave collectively as a society? There's a clear distinction to be made there. A Procter & Gamble is not a Times of India. They're both corporations, they're both organizations, but they're selling two different very kind of products. One is selling a product which serves its social causes. One is selling it to make profits and give us better clean products, personal hygiene products or whatever else it is. The day we start collapsing what it is to be a social institution, to be a private enterprise, is where we are putting ourselves in a quandary. So briefly, without going too much into that, there are different conceptualizations both among practitioners of journalism and scholars regarding its role in society. Is it a job? Yes, it is. Is it a craft? Yes, it is. You have to write 10 stories, get it edited 20 times before you can finally publish it and print it. It's a craft that you have to work on every single day to polish and perfect. Just like a painter or an artist practices their craft every day. It's a trade. Of course it's a trade. There's advertising involved because of which you're able to buy a newspaper for 2 rupees 50 paise or 4 rupees 50 paise, and we complain when it goes to 6 rupees per copy. It takes about 50 rupees to print a copy. You're getting it for 6 rupees. Who's subsidizing it? The advertisers. It is a trade. It is an occupation. It was mine for several years. It's going to be for some of you students going forward. It's what people do every day to bring home the bread and put it on the table and maintain their families. So for a lot of journalists, it's also what they call a mirror. It reflects some happenings in the real world. Journalism is a container. It's a repository of shared information for centuries. You can go and see what happened in India in 1911, 1947. Where are you going to go and find out what happened then? Public records, right? What are the public records? First draft of history. What is the first draft of history? Journalism. You go and look at what happened, how was it covered in the newspapers those days. That's our only immediate first source to information. Before we go and, of course, further research it in libraries wherein books, novels, journals, articles, and scholarly publications have been recorded about it. But our first step is always to go and say, oh, what happened on that day? Go and see the newspaper, the digital archives, or the physical archives on that day. So it's a repository of our collective shared information. It's a child that must be tended to. something that has to be nurtured as a practice, as a profession, and it is a service above all to the public. It's different from other professions wherein you work for a company, for the company to make profits. Here you work for a company, for the company to make profits, but that profits are shared, has to be shared with society. I'm not saying the profits in terms of monetary, but the profit of what you're doing, what you're producing is shared. And that's where the public service aspect of it comes in. So I just want to come back briefly to the point that I made earlier about how when we talk about the media or journalism, it's not just the journalist, the news organization, the news studio, the public face of what you see. There's a whole big behind the scenes system that exists because of which what you see is what you see. You have your popular news anchors, you have your popular newspapers, you have your popular online sites. So we always think of journalism as our journalist to our channel, auru, yuru. We just look at the faces. We don't look at the whole system behind it, which actually shapes what we are consuming as news consumers. So I want to talk about a little bit about the concept of the media ecology. Just like we talk about the ecosystem, there is a media ecosystem. It involves businesses which run and produce and publish these items that we consume, the news items that we consume, whether it's the newspaper, television, radio, etc. Part of this ecosystem is the government. It plays a very important role in regulating how the press functions in a particular society. Labor regulations. Who works? How much do they work? Once upon a time, you had, all newspapers were unionized, wherein employees could not be hired and fired at will. That's long gone now. That went about 20 years ago. It's no longer there. So there's no job security, right? It's hire and fire like in any other industry. And how does labor dynamics affect what kind of work people are doing? It's not just your reporter who you see on the screen. There's an editor, there's a graphics person, there is the person who brings your tea when you're doing the editing. And labor dynamics within the newsroom play a big role in what kind of news is finally put out there at the end of the day. Because like in any other industry, a happy labor force puts out a happy product. If you have a dissatisfied labor force, it reflects in the kind of product that is being put out there. Infrastructure matters. When I talk about infrastructure, I'm not just talking about the tables, chairs, etc., wherein journalists and news organizations work. What are the kinds of infrastructure that affect us in the public sphere when we are talking about news? Broadband. Do you have internet connectivity? Do you have cable? There are companies which provide these, which are not your news companies. They're also part of the news media ecosystem. Those are the delivery channels and mechanisms. And each of these, when there's an imbalance or there's a problem in any of these, it affects the end product, which is the news. And if the news is affected, then it affects our understanding of what is happening in society and our exploration of it. So now that I've laid out these two fundamental concepts that I wanted to talk about, I'll just go point by point to some of the main issues that are facing us today. As an observer, as a scholar of the media, these are some of the things that my colleagues and I talk about. They are not original ideas, but these are the most pressing ideas and issues that we are talking about. And what's the way forward for us? One of the biggest issues in journalism, not just in India, but across the world, is the big split between public interest journalism and commercial journalism. When I talk about public interest journalism, I'm talking about organizations and institutions which are non-profit, which are either regulated and owned by the government so that consumers get access to it for free or for a nominal fee. They are subsidized. Or you have the commercial outlets which operate purely in terms of your subscription fees that you pay for. Simplest example, public interest journalism, Doordarshan, Akashvani, right? They're run by the government, subsidized by the government, accessible to anybody and anyone who has a terrestrial dish, an antenna, and there is no differentiation there. Commercial is all your Star, Zee, Sony, etc., wherein you pay your cable person, the cable person then pays them, and that's how you get access to it. How does Akashvani and Doordarshan make its money for running? The government or through charitable institutions. So in the US, you have an equivalent which is called the PBS, which is the Public Broadcasting System. It is not owned by the US government, but it is subsidized by philanthropic contributions from various organizations who want public interest journalism to thrive. Another example is the BBC in the United Kingdom. It is owned and run by a trust, which again is subsidized by the government and contributions. Why is public interest journalism important? Because the biggest guideline for them is that they cannot be partisan. In other words, they cannot take sides. They have to give equal representation to all sections of the political divide and the spectrum, and they have to report as is what is going on. Private sector does not have any such kind of a ground line or a guideline that they have to kind of follow. So the more that we have seen the decline of public interest journalism, we have also seen the rise of partisan and biased news media. Who funds whom is very important. I was talking about the media ecosystem, right? Where is a channel's money coming from? Who is funding them? What kind of equations do they have with the government in power? All of these make a huge difference to the kind of news that they put out, which we assume is reality. Again, I'm coming back to the point of, is it mirroring what is happening in society? Is it just news? Is it opinion being passed off as news? How much of it is being manipulated? So those are some of the questions that we really need to ask ourselves when we are looking at the Indian media scenario. I'll give you a simple example in terms of some of the issues that come with, as long as there is commercial interest and private operators, but several of them in competition, it's healthy. Because somebody wants to do better than the other, and everyone's, there's a level playing field, and everyone is competing to give the best possible product. What happens when 1, 2, or 3 powerful media houses or business people or organizations start acquiring and control majority of the media in our country? Simple analogy, you go to the local kirana store or the supermarket. You want milk, right? You get 10 options. E brand ide, a brand ide, 2%, full milk, full toned, adu, idu. You have a choice as a consumer. You can make up your mind depending on what is there. You are intelligent, right? What if you go to the supermarket and say, A athwa B, ashte, inenu illa. You're being force-fed with just 2 options. You don't have the choice to look at various different options and then make a choice. And you take that to be the truth, and you take that to be the reality. And whatever they are giving you, you take because you don't have a choice, right? So what happens when one business house owns 20%, 30% of news organizations across the web, across television, across newspapers? What happens to your power of a conscious consumer who has a choice? And then think about it. What happens when that same news organization, also by the way, is your cable TV and your internet service provider? For example, in 2011, the Indian Parliament passed the Cable Televisions Regulation Amendment Bill that made digitization of cable television across the country mandatory in 3 years. Right? So everything had to be, no more cables, it had to be set-top box, it had to be all of that, or dish TV, or whatever it is. As media professor Arvind Rajgopal, whose work is very reputable, pointed out at that time itself, The bill also effectively paved the way for concentrated corporate control of media, since the largest cable service providers were already owning broadcasting companies as well. See the irony here? Soon enough, in January 2012, less than a year after this bill was passed, Reliance Industries took over Television 18 in a hostile takeover. So your cable services provider also became your news provider. This is what we talk about as problematic monopolization of the news business. Not so long ago, we had another hostile takeover of one of India's most reputable television news companies. Then Mr. Adani took over NDTV in a hostile takeover again. Right? And please note, both of these were hostile takeovers. They were not mutually agreeable takeovers. What's wrong with, businessmen owning news organizations? Absolutely nothing. Rupert Murdoch is a businessman. He owns several news organizations. Silvio Berlusconi, the former Prime Minister of Italy, controls all of the news media in Italy. So let's not think that, bari nam deshadalli agtide, what is happening in India? India is going to the dogs. No, the whole world is going to the dogs. We're just joining the party. But we have a choice. Do we want to join that party or not? Right? And so there's nothing wrong with industry and businessmen owning news organizations. The problem happens when only 3 or 4 businessmen own all your news organizations. And then you have to ask yourself, what is the agenda for a businessman who runs petroleum or a port to own a news organization as well? Public service, profit, both of it, little bit of it. I'm not going to give the answers. I'm just throwing this open to you, for you to think about it. What is the agenda? What is the environment that has made these takeovers possible? Dig deep. You'll find the answers yourself. Right? And look closely at the coverage that you see every day. How has it changed? Whose voices are being upheld? Whose voices are being pushed down? Why? Ask yourself these questions before you just consume it. Right? We are so careful about our health. Every packet we pick up, like, what are the ingredients? Sodium % to sugar, okay, I want this, I want that. Only then you're going to put it into your mouth. So when you look at a news item, ask yourself, where is this coming from? Why is this person being promoted so much? Is this truth? Is this reality? Or is there some agenda behind it? And so closely associated with the problematics of the conglomerations and monopolization of journalism that is happening in India today is its impact on what we call the freedom of the press, which is, to me, the biggest problematic area in India today. The freedom of the press 2 days ago was the day we celebrated as Constitution Day. Article 19(1)(a) says we all have the freedom, the right to expression, under which the freedom of the press is sacrosanct, it's sacred, it is protected. But every single day we are seeing the freedom of the press in our country being eroded in one way or the other. We often think of freedom of the press, and then we think about censorship, and we think about the government. Press freedom is compromised only when the government cracks down, like it did during the emergency. One of the biggest black spots in India's democratic history. There's nothing that can ever condone what happened during the emergency to press freedom. If that was one big issue during 3 years that took place, what we are seeing every day is 10 instances of it in small ways every single day. And it happens in very insidious ways. It happens in very small, sneaky ways. It does not have to be like a big bang or a big chop. The biggest excuse used is, oh, this is a national interest. So therefore there will be trouble here. We will shut down internet. What happened during the riots in Manipur? What happens in Kashmir? What happens anywhere that there is an issue wherein people are protesting? Oh, it is against national interest, national security. We will shut down the internet. That is the first point where your freedom as a citizen is being curtailed by the government. It's not just the freedom of the press, it's your freedom. The freedom to know and the freedom to do. In 2023, this very year, India, which is shining, where Achhe Din Hai, its ranking slipped from 150 to 161, 11 spots down in press freedom, according to Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index, which is worldwide and accepted and held up. And guess out of how many countries this is? 180. Out of 180 countries, India ranks 161. But no one talks about this because we are so busy celebrating so many other things that are going so well in our country. On October 3rd, 2023, it was a black day in the history of Indian journalism, the biggest crackdown by the Indian state directly. 46 journalists and their homes, including 9 women, who were said to be directly or indirectly associated with the news portal NewsClick, were raided by the Delhi Police Special Cell in the wee hours of the morning. NewsClick is a portal which has been accused of taking funds from a pro-China lobbyist in the US. But then what were these journalists booked under? Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA, which is a stringent law that is used almost always only against terrorists. If you have an issue with journalists, there are so many other laws out there which can be used in order for you to take them into custody, to interrogate them, to get to the heart of the matter. Why book them under an act which is under the Terrorist Act? What are you scared of? What is the news that they're putting out that you're scared of? They are constitutionally protected under the freedom of the press. Why are they being treated like criminals? Until they're proven guilty, they have the right to appeal. Almost all of these journalists, and I know some of them personally because they were colleagues of mine, said upon their release that when they were being interrogated by the police, they were almost always often asked, did they cover the year-long farmers' agitation? Did they cover anti-Muslim Delhi riots? Did they cover the bad side of the COVID-19 crisis? Why were they doing stories that portrayed India in a poor light? Journalists were doing their jobs. They were covering issues that were happening in the country. Are journalists then supposed to only portray only the good things about India? Are they not supposed to point out to what is wrong, what is going wrong, and how they need to be fixed? Should they be booked under a terrorist act? Again, questions for us to ponder. This is where I would come back to the second point that I was raising, which I think more than news organization, more than the government, more than the journalists, it's people like you and me who are the biggest problem in India's news media ecosystem today. It's people like us who blindly consume, make up our minds without doing due diligence, act upon it without the responsibility that comes to us as citizens. And when I say we, I count myself in first. We all have a pact, a social contract towards each other. Otherwise, we would not be a country, a nation, a constitution, a government. But we are so blindsided now to just consume and live in a bubble of what suits our so-called ideological interests, that we have forgotten our social contract. We don't do due diligence to the news that is being given to us. We have a personality cult. We have partisan cults. And we follow blindly whatever suits us. Whether it is reality, whether it is not reality. Is it the truth? Is it not the truth? Does it have a basis? Does it not have a basis? Doesn't matter. This sounds good to me. This is what I want. And so when I talk about our role as consumers of news, I want to talk about 2 or 3 specific ways in which I think we kind of are not doing our part. The minute anything comes on our WhatsApp feed, right, or our Facebook feed, how many of us actually go to the source of that news before sharing it to 200 people in some group and spreading rumors? Have you gone to a credible news channel, an outlet to check, is this happening? Where is it happening? Why is it happening? No, he said that ante. 200 likes, great. My job for the day is done. I'm so popular. What have we done in the process? Spread misinformation, spread disinformation. Created distrust amongst ourselves as people. One community doesn't like another. That sub-community doesn't like another sub-community. The third sub-community doesn't like the sixth sub-community. Let's all have a party spreading misinformation. And then we blame the news media. Oh, they said that. Who are they? They're part of you. Who are we? We are part of them. We're all part of the same society. The news media, it's very common and very often we say this very nice term. I mean, we always say, no? People get a government as good as they are. You get the government that you deserve, right? We always say this. Namge takkad sarkara sikkide namge. We get the media that we deserve. If we are not holding the media to account, if we are not asking the media tough questions, if we are just blindly consuming whatever they are giving us, the media is out there to make profits. Of course, they will give you more of what you want. When a child asks chocolate and the child keeps quiet, child gets a second chocolate. Child gets a third chocolate. Child gets a fourth chocolate. Everyone's happy. Child is happy. You are happy. Cadbury's is happy because they're making profit. What happens to the child? Unhealthy. What happens to you? I don't know. What is your role there? Oh, I just kept the child happy. Really? Keeping the child happy led to what? The child getting unwell. Where does your responsibility comes in? Where does our responsibility come in? I always used to tell my students, we used to have these assignments. I say, okay, come with the 3 top stories of the day. So they would come to class, we'd all sit, tell me, what are the 3 top stories according to you? This. Where did you find it? Snapchat, WhatsApp, Facebook. Oh, so what is the news organizations there for? Oh, but this is easy to get it from here. Who's fact checking here? Who's checking the verification here? Recently we have seen the horror that is going on in Gaza and Israel. Right? Whether we want to see it or not, it's there. It's reality. It's happening. But how much fake news is circulating about it? People are doctoring. People are changing videos. People are claiming 50 people dead when only 5 people are dead, or when saying 5 people are dead when 500 people are dead. Why? Because so much of this, we've heard these days, and then we all have these fancy terms. Deep fake news. They all boil down to one thing, credibility. What is credibility? Credibility is when you ask questions about what you're consuming. Who do you ask? The media. Hold them to account. Ask the media, no, you did this wrong. No, but instead we will say, oh, I like that anchor so much. Whatever he says is like, so good. I shall follow him. Very good, very good. What he's saying, what the outlet is putting out. We all consider ourselves educated. We all consider ourselves intelligent, and the truth is we all are. It's just that these days we decide to keep them in the showcase and act as if nothing is happening, and it's not our responsibility. Something is going wrong, government is doing something wrong. Oh, that is wrong? Oh, the media is bad. I don't want to see the media. The media is giving you what you're asking for. You have a choice to ask for different things. And again, please, when I say you, I put I first in that you category because I'm part of the same community. I have to always check my biases. I tend to say, okay, I like this organization, they're reputable, but then I always cross-check even my favorite organization with 3 other organizations because I want to get the truth of the matter. I don't want to make up my mind. Second, we always have this chicken and egg question, right? Media is giving us this, there's no other option. We don't have any other option, so we will watch this. Media says we are giving people what they want. Who's right? Both of them are equally right, both of them are equally wrong. And here comes the big problem when I was talking about the media ecosystem, right? No one can adjudicate who's right and wrong here because that is being done by a third party, the advertisers and the television rating points. Highest TRPs for the number 1 year, highest TRPs for 2 weeks in a row, highest mostly watched English news channel for 6 months in a row. Based on what? TRPs. What are TRPs based on? It's a very, very wishy-washy system which has a very small select audience group, meters put in select audience homes which are then supposed to be representative of 1.6 billion people. Based on this, advertisers give more money to those channels. Those channels become more popular. Whatever they put out, then you say, oh, most popular channel must be right. So you see how there are cycles and cycles and cycles. It's not just you, it's not just the journalist, it's not just a news organization. There are systems that don't work, there are systems which are dubious. And that is how we kind of get caught up in this. We want everything to be simple. Unfortunately, the news industry is not as simple as we would like it to be. But where can we start? My humble request, next time you see something on your WhatsApp feed, please go to the source of the news before you share it with 200 people. Please go to at least one news site, whichever it is that you like, which is an established news site. Check the real news before you share it. When you don't like something, when you are agitated about something that a news organization is doing, go to their website. See the contact of the editor. Almost all of, they have to have that. Letters to the editor, comments to the editor. Make your voice known. Write to them saying, call them out if they're wrong. They need checks and balances like they have checks and balances against somebody. They also have to be held accountable. We hold the politicians to account. We hold our doctors to account. We file cases against them. We sue them in terms of if there's medical negligence. If there's negligence by the journalists in public interest, they should also be held accountable. I saw a report yesterday which says that as the elections are coming up, majority of Indians in urban areas are bypassing traditional news organizations and going by what social media influencers are saying about the upcoming elections. That is a red flag. Because political parties are now going to hire those social media influencers to put out the kind of news, propaganda. When I say news, that's obviously it's propaganda. Every party is going to do it. No one's better than the other about it. And they're going to put propaganda through social media influencers who we follow because we respect them. Where's journalism in the matrix? Oh, somewhere there. Somewhere there. Social media is more important. Social media influencers know better. Have they gone and reported? Have they seen the ground reality? No. So when news becomes propaganda, we also have a role to play in it. Let's remember that we are not innocent in what is happening here. We are as active a part of this entire process, as is the government, as are the business corporations, as is the news media. And I know it's not a very nice thing to hear about ourselves. We always like to place the blame on someone else and say, that's how it is. It's not absolve the news media from what they're doing. Earlier, there used to be a time when you could go to a television channel or a newspaper for that matter. It would be obvious that they kind of, what do you call it, support a political party or a political ideology through their headline or the little twist they would give to the story. But you would also get 20 other types of stories. You could make up your mind. There would be some option. It was like a thali. You have your favorite thing there, yeah, it's there, it's right in the middle, but you also have other things. But now it's like one plate, one dish. You have to go to 10 to make up your mind because each one is telling you only one point of view. And why is that happening? That's happening because who's funding who? And how is who funding who being looked upon by who is in power? Who's promoting who? And it's not just this particular dispensation. It has happened in the past. It will happen in the future. And it will happen more in the future if we absolve our rights as citizens, as people who should be holding the media and the government accountable. A little bit of soul searching from our side. Yes, everyone wants to see their political point of view, their ideology as something that is being promoted. But the greater interest of the society, wherein let there be a free flow of all types of information and let people make up their mind. Let's not force feed or not try to force feed others into one way of thinking or one line of thinking. And forget about influencing anyone. Let's not get influenced before we have used our own intelligence in looking at every angle and every perspective before we make a choice and before we blame others. So I think basically that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about what is the role of the media, what is journalism, what is happening. 3 main points, what's happening in terms of consolidation and monopolization of our news media, freedom of the press, who is playing what role. I'm not blaming a particular party, a government, an industry, or a particular businessman. It's a collective situation that we are in, and what is our role in it as media consumers. I think the prognosis of our news media, the prognosis of our society, whether it will get healthier or whether it will get sicker, depends on us. The right to vote for the government, the right to choose what media we want to consume, and more importantly, the right to exercise our free will after using our intelligence and doing due diligence and looking at all points of view and being responsible citizens of this country that all of us love equally and no one should be questioned whether we love it more or we love it less. So on that note, I throw it open to there are any number of ways to make this country better, and all views should be included. The same way, any number of ways to make our news media better. But for all of that, the spark has to come from us. We have to demand better. We have to ask for better. And then we have to make sure that we are responsible in the way we consume the media, we share the media, and hold the media accountable, just like the way we hold them and the government accountable. So on that note, I'd like to open it for any questions, answers, discussions, disagreements. I'm all for it. So thank you for listening. This room. Yes, sir.
Spade is spade. And your family circles and my family circles are participants in this WhatsApp University bulletin conversation. But it all started prior to the advent of TV in India. Let me name it. It stands for it. When a social messaging platform like newspapers, what you call public service messaging, was converted deeply into a product productization.
Yeah.
But how far it could go, how far probably it could be curtailed. Right. Any insights?
I'm sorry, but I won't be able to say how far, it's just so deeply embedded right now. I think that right now, first what we need to stop the rot that's going on before we can actually start reversing what has happened. It's just like the environment, the business environment, the way in which everything is playing out is all very muddled right now. And I wouldn't hazard a guess, and I don't want to talk about something that I don't know. But I really think that it is a big problem, the way everything is being completely commercialized without sticking to the basic idea that yes, news media is a profit-making institution. It will be, but it has little something different from the others, which is social and public interest, and we've lost sight of it.
Serious erosion into integrity. Serious erosion into integrity.
Sorry?
Serious erosion into integrity.
Yeah.
As far as public messaging is concerned.
Yeah.
Please use the mic. Speak. Not very audible. Speak from there.
When the Times of India sold the masthead to KitKat, if you remember those days.
Yeah.
Long ago. So, it's very difficult. It is probably our own mistake. We have to change ourselves.
Yeah.
We have to probably, inward looking is now,
Yeah.
it's timely, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm implicated to talking about politics every time. But we are in a juncture where politics should be discussed.
Yeah. I think, thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your thoughts. I really appreciate it. When you're talking about, we have to question ourselves. I wanted to, I kept talking a lot about, news media as public interest, public service. Why do I keep talking about it? Because that's how it was instituted, that's how it was constituted. And then when we say what is the role of the news media and what is public interest, I just want to give you a small example, which I found very interesting. What is public interest, right? What do we expect from so when I keep saying that, what are we expecting from our media? What are we holding them accountable to, right? So, of course, all of us want page 3. We want masala, we want entertainment. Nobody wants just like, heavy news all the time. But when page 1 becomes page 3 and page 1 to 29 become, masala tamasha entertainment, that's where public interest is being underserved. So for example, is a cricketer having some affair in his hotel room? That's one news item, okay? Second news item, elected representatives discussing a debate on an important bill in parliament, which by the way affects all of us directly. What is public interest? Yes, he's a cricketer, he is a public figure, very important, but what he does in his private life, does it affect your life and mine? Women's reservation is being debated, or a bill on something else is being debated. It affects your life and mine in every single way, every day, for the rest of our lives. Tax bill is being debated. Should foreign direct investment in education be allowed or not? We are sitting in an educational institution. That is being debated. Is the news organization covering that or this? Or if the news organization is better still, the news organization is covering both, what are you watching? What are we watching? Where is our role before we point fingers at the news organization or at the government? We want to know what cricketer XYZ did. Did he order champagne? Did he order oysters? Did he order chocolate? What was she wearing? Where is she from? Bill passed, not passed. Yen bill? Yadadu? That is what I talk about as our role as consumers. We will get the media. So then the media will say, oh, eyeballs and eye clicks, TRPs, circulation. This got more clicks and hits. So we'll do more stories like this. Okay, now cricketer over, go find a hockey person, go find a film star. Reporters are sent to cover such stories. So instead of one story per day, you'll find 5 stories like that per day. Very nice. Everyone happy. Advertiser happy, TRP happy, you're happy, WhatsApp is happy, friends are happy. Poor parliament. What is the parliament? 547 people, representative of 1.6 billion of us. Come March, ishtu tax, government is terrible. I am paying too much tax. I am not getting services for my tax. Oh, good morning. It happened last June. No, I didn't get any notification on WhatsApp. Oh, did you watch the newspaper, TV? It must be there somewhere, 7th story, 8th story. Why 7th story, 8th story? Because first story, cricketer, more interesting. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror. What are we asking for? What are we getting? What is public interest? What is not public interest? This is just a simple example. There's no harm in we all have voyeuristic tendencies in us. We all like gossip. We all like rumor. But there's a time and place for it. So before we point fingers at the government or the media, let's first do this. What are we doing? Any other thoughts,
I have a
questions?
question.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you hopeful of things getting better in the future because you being a faculty in a journal, you are a lecturer, you gave lectures and all. So now that, is it possible to set it right in during the colleges when instill like we have a medical ethics? Is there any way that you can change the way the journalism is taught, and are you hopeful about that?
Absolutely. I think that is something that has started very much so, at least in the US institutions where I was working in. One of the things that we did, we started having a compulsory media literacy module and media ethics module in all journalism courses, so that students know exactly what, it has always been there. Media ethics has always been part of journalism studies. I'm sure all of you also have papers on media ethics. That's always been there, but I think its importance has is much more emphasized now. So while ethics is there, I think the importance now is being more in terms of media literacy. What do you consume, how do you consume, and how do you differentiate between fake news and real news? The nuts and bolts of it. So ethics is more the conceptual framework, which has already been there. But now I think more courses are focusing on how to actually look at how it works out, the nuts and bolts. And I would suggest that it's not necessary only for media students or journalism students. It should be part of, all students at some of the higher education level at least. How do you, and it's a valid question, I completely understand. How do I, as a normal person sitting in a Mysore, Bangalore, anywhere, right, for that matter, how do I know if this is fake or not? What are my tools to find out? I am not a journalist, I am not a scholar, I am not an academic. Fair enough, that is an absolutely valid question. How do you find out what is fake, what is not fake, right? So I think it's also important for news organizations to have, little sessions, little videos, little things that they can promote on their websites, which they can promote on YouTube, the same social media that we consume. Look out for this, don't look out for that. This is fake, this is not fake. How do you find out fake? So I think everyone has to come together. Civil society, news organizations, and citizens, and educational institutions have to come together to kind of say that, okay, we need something. Like during COVID, we had so much of educational videos that were going around, right? How do you protect yourself? How do you do that? Why don't we have non-profit organizations, civil society, or even news organizations putting out such videos saying this is how you as a consumer can say what is fake, what is not fake. Has it been altered, not altered? Who should you be looking at, not be looking at? Where can you go to fact check? Now this is one big problem in all news organizations in India, which I have worked with. I'm proud of the kind of news organizations that we have in India in terms of the robust work that they still do despite so many challenges surrounding them. I do not know of more than a handful that have a fact check desk. Reporters are supposed to bring in news which is supposed to be factual, which is then edited, but most often it is just edited for language and length, polished. Sometimes questions are asked, are you sure it's accurate, it's 200, not 500, etc. But one thing that I learned is like good, robust news organizations, not just in the West, but even in, say, Eastern Europe or in Southeast Asia, they have a dedicated fact-check desk. Every single fact, every number, everything is checked before it is put out. So then you as a consumer can say, okay, this I can consume without having to put too much of tale into it because there's a fact-check desk out there who's responsible and who has done the work for me. But till that happens, I would seriously suggest that we all kind of, take everything with a pinch of salt. And it would be a great idea if at our +2 level, we now have so many other extracurricular curriculum, right? Whether it's from our ancient Indian traditions or from Western traditions, we have so many of the courses or modules that students can choose from. Why not have a small media literacy module? We used to have moral science class, we now have yoga, we have all sorts of things which are helping students become well-rounded individuals, sports, arts, crafts. What is more well-rounded than being a conscious, responsible public citizen when they become adults? Why can't we as educational institutions, educators, it's a great idea if we can all start collaborating in our small way. If this university, its journalism course, and then journalism students go and do small classes for students in high schools, we can start building this before, we don't have to wait for anyone else to do it. We can start building and doing this ourselves in order to kind of, put checks and balances in place.
I really appreciate your point about due diligence and fact-checking in the journalism. In fact, perhaps 2-3 decades back, there was an institution like MRTP, Monopolies and Restricted Trade Practices Act was there. Now that act has been replaced perhaps by Competition Commission of India, or if I am right. So it is their duty to see that these larger media houses don't step out of beyond the Lakshman Rekha. That is one, correct. Another point which I want to touch upon is not the core issue of what we discussed today, but it is a peripheral issue perhaps in the large interest of the audience here. I also was watching BBC, those days Mark Tully, how he was covering the news items in India. I also watch, Al Jazeera, France 24, Public TV here in Karnataka, Our Republic now, correct, no. The distinguishing factor is that we are not able to enjoy watching some of the Karnataka or Indian-based TV channels because the size of the screen, whether it is 55 or whatever it is, no. One side you have 2-3 ಕಾರು ಬಸ್ಸು ಕಾರು ಅಪಘಾತ ಆಯಿತು ಮತ್ತು ಇಬ್ಬರು ಮೃತ್ಯು ಆದರು, ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕಡೆಯಲ್ಲಿ TMT advertisement ಇರ್ತದೆ. So whereas we are not seeing this, we really enjoy watching the TV channels, Al Jazeera, whatever may be the content of what we are not going to question on that, but really enjoying or witnessing by the general audience. So I just wanted your reaction on that, whether this point can be controlled by the broadcasting authority, enforcement authority or so. One. Finally, I really thank you very much for taking us and giving a lot of insight into the media space, and I must thank the PP Gomati Trust in general and Dr. Kakala in particular from bringing such a scholar to a place, a city like Mangalore. We are lucky to listen to a altogether a different topic today. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I'm very humbled by your words. I'm just sharing my thoughts.
One clarification that he was talking about MRTP Commission. MRTP Commission had no power about news content. And what MRTP Commission had brought in was an act about advertisements to cover false and misleading advertisements. MRTP Commission only had some power over the ownership of the media houses so that they won't have more than a certain percentage. So that's the only clarification I wanted to give you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for you answered the question much better than I could have answered, so thank you. Thank you, sir. But yeah, so like sir said, they don't have jurisdiction over that. And in terms of, you were talking about the ticker space, enjoyment, That's all driven by the revenue and the business model. So there was a time when newspapers and news organizations were making more money from subscription. That is what you and I were paying. That's another point that I wanted to point out, which I skipped because I didn't want to like go on for too long and open it up for discussion. The minute we see anything, any price rise from 2 rupees 50 paisa to 3 rupees for a newspaper, we are like, it's becoming expensive. We don't think twice whether we're paying 40 rupees or 60 rupees for an ice cream. Because that's pleasure, this is a necessity. So we make that distinction very clear. Why are we getting that newspaper for so cheap? It's because newsprint is very expensive. It still is. The whole process is expensive. It is almost always compensated for by the advertising. So the standard till recently used to be 60-40, which is 40% news and 60% advertising. The more you look at our papers today, it's about 80-20. It's like 20% news and 80% of advertising. And then there's the other issue of paid for news, which is advertisers will not put an advertisement, but they'll put an article, infotainment article promoting something, which is paid news. Now for normal people who are in a hurry or who don't have a concept of it, it's very difficult to distinguish what is news and what is paid news. Because both of them are printed in the same font, written in the same way, the same style. It's very difficult to distinguish. So we need, but again, there comes the issue of our private newspapers, our press is self-regulatory. We do not have a central government regulation like China does. So it's a self-regulatory body. So the self-regulatory body has to come up with certain guidelines and make it mandatory. So it was then proposed and floated that any such paid for news should have a little tag or a headline about it saying this is an advertorial or a paid item. How many of them actually do it and slip in? We all know very well. Right? Some of them, it is said this is an advertorial, this is a promotion, but not almost always. So the power is more in terms of what the advertisers are demanding and how much advertisers are giving. Why this shift to advertisers? Because subscription falling. Why is subscription falling? Because we are not paying. Where does the buck stop? Again with us. Are we willing to pay? Now, there's a big uproar. I can't access this website because there's a paywall. Right? If you don't pay, you don't get the content. You still want the content, you don't want to pay, then be ready for advertisers to be dictating what news should. Choice is very clear. If you want unbiased news, if you don't want advertising influence, if you want straightforward news, then we should be willing to pay for it. क्वालिटी चाहिए तो पैसा दे दो वरना बकवास खाओ. It's, I mean, I'm sorry for putting it so crudely, but it is what it is. And there are a lot of news organizations, non-profits, or even profit news organizations here, which are doing very solid, serious public interest journalism. Like they will focus on the parliament debate and not on the cricketer. Right? But they do well for 2 years, 2.5 years, and they fold up. Why? Because nobody is paying for them. Whereas those who are focusing on the cricketers and the advertisers and the, all of that are growing from strength to strength. Because why? We are still getting it for 2 rupees 50 paisa. Mera kya jata hai? Right? But when the paywall asks to pay 100 rupees per month for subscription, 100 rupees. So you want quality, we have to be willing to pay for it. And if you're not willing to pay for it, then we have to live with the consequences of not paying for it and the kind of quality that we have. And a lot of organizations have started, a lot of them have folded up. And it's not just in India, it's worldwide. At least here we still have a thriving newspaper industry. In the West, it's almost gone because of technological changes and in terms of access and everything. Do we want to end up like them? One of the good things about being a late starter is that we can make sure that we don't make the mistakes that they have done. But no, like they say, Ratri kande bavige haglu hog bindante. It's like that. We are intent on making more mistakes, even though we have examples. So before we get to there, what can we put in place? Let's start paying a little more for quality journalism. Let's start making up our own minds. Let's hold the media accountable. And let's, encourage our youngsters so many of you have kids, grandkids, cousins, nephews, nieces. Encourage them to see more news at home, not just entertainment. Catch them young, watch them grow. What we'll get tomorrow is what we have sown today. Any students have any questions?
On this statement, or do you think, is there any ism left in journalism today?
Sir, through all my cynicism, I still have some optimism for journalism.
Well, a journalist probably should be realistic, not optimistic.
No, I would say I'm pragmatic. So I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic or optimistic or... So when I say I'm optimistic for it if we take the course correction now. If we don't take the course correction now, there is no journalism left. There's some journalism left, some, very little, but the minute you say that that is journalism, then there's, labeling, finger pointing, which I don't want to get into. Like if you say social good is good, then you're a socialist. If you say this is good, then you're right. If this is good, left. We're also busy in branding each other. But I digress there. The point is that there is still some good journalism being done. Are we going to encourage it through good funding, through consuming it, or are we going to just, kind of take the easy way out? And that is a question that journalists have to ask themselves very seriously. Because a lot of journalists have got so consumed with their own personality cult that they've forgotten what made them a personality. And that is another problem, a serious problem in the industry, wherein journalism is not about the work that you do, but about the person that you are. And that leads to a domino effect of people following them and their views without actually doing the due diligence of what is actually going on around. So unless we fix all these various issues, the outlook is bleak. But if we take some course correction, that's why I said I'm pragmatic, there's still hope. But, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say it's all gone, Forget it, because then there's going to be no turning back then. We still have to fight for what's left of journalism. Because if we give up on journalism, then what's going to take its place? Already propaganda has taken a large space. Already it's views. Already it is like my view versus your view. Fact has become fiction. So even that space, if it's conceded, then it's going to be taken over just by pure propaganda. And then you don't know what it will bode for democracy, for the public. It's like cascading effect. So hold on to what we have and try to make it healthier.
Well, sounds utopian.
Very utopian, but उम्मीद पे दुनिया कायम है.
Have you noticed the shrinkage in the letters to the editor in the print media?
Oh, absolutely, sir.
Yeah, because I've been noticing it. Because I don't know whether it's because of the larger space given to comments on their website versions, or is it because of some other reason? What is your opinion?
So I can share something with you. Back in between 2008 to 2011, 2006 to 2011, when I was on the edit page of the Times of India, I also took care of the letters to the editor column. Even then, the number of letters we got were very, very few. It's not that the newspapers are shrinking the space for them. It's the kind of input that they're getting from people is shrinking. I still remember around in 2008, we would get like about 50 to 100 letters a day. By 2010-11, if we got like 10 letters a day, it was, great. And then we had what we call the serial letter writers, who would say, this is my 80th letter this month, please publish it. So, you have all sorts. But with the website version, and like you rightly pointed out, sir, people now are leaving comments on the website more. And therefore, the shrinkage in the letters to the editor column in the print section. So it's a combination both of less input from readers and readers shifting their, area of where they write the letters and editors to the website. And that's another big issue, is that we seem to think in the urban areas that, we all live on the internet now. What is India's internet penetration? How many people of 1.6 billion actually even access it on the internet or through the mobile? We somehow seem to think that we live in this bubble that, oh, everything, GPay hai, WhatsApp hai, this hai, this hai. We are a completely computerized internet digitized society. How far is it true? The latest report by Reuters Institute of Study of Journalism says, does just a study about Twitter and its usage across the world. About 15% of the global population uses Twitter. And we think of it as the primary source of news and discourse in the world. 15%, what is it? And where is that 15% located? Mostly in the West. Of the 15% in the West, how many of them are educated white males? Who's setting the agenda? And you start asking these deeper questions, and then you are like, oh, Twitter revolution. That is my go-to source for news. How representative is it if it's only 15% of the world's population? I mean, I'm saying 15% as a ballpark. It was some minuscule population like that. And then if that is the world, which has greater internet penetration and, people are on social media and on these platforms, think of India. Let's go to 10 places that we haven't been to in India, ask people about Twitter. We will see what reality about social media is. Yet we seem to think that our democratic discourse and our public discourse is all done on social media. What world are we living in? Just because you and I have access to it in urban areas. Even in urban areas, let's go to the shanty parts of our areas, which is not pleasant, nobody wants to look at. Nobody wants to go there. Every big city has it. Bombay has it, Delhi has it, Washington DC has it, New York has it. There are parts of us who are not us. Like when G20 happened, we had these famous, all the slums being covered with beautiful hoardings. Because delegates should not see the ugly side of India. What's the ugly side of India? People living in poverty. Oh, they're also Indians, no? Yeah. That's how we think about our own people. And then all the glitzy G20 videos go up for the world, how India has changed. How India doesn't want to show its own. I mean, we can go on and on about these kind of debates. But how many of us read news articles about people in big cities being evicted and moved because they were going to look like a sore thumb when dignitaries visited? They were taken out of their own homes. Because this is where all the foreign dignitaries' root is. If they see people like this, then they will question India's development story. Did we read those stories? Did we share them on WhatsApp, by the way? No. We shared only what is beautiful about India. Sorry? Told by whom? See, when we start asking those questions, the answers become clear to us. We don't have to name, right? You can see it for yourself. You can see. And the minute you question your own people, you're unpatriotic. If someone outside questions you, they want to portray India in a bad light. If you're not going to be honest about ourselves, how can we aspire to truly grow and develop? It's like a family which says, this child went to IIT, this one failed. We'll act as if we have only one son. We don't have two sons. If we are not going to own up to ourselves, and if you're going to be so prickly all the time that someone's calling us out, yes, a lot of Western media does that because India is a poverty industry. There is a lot of truth in that. And I'm the first person to call them out on that. India is not just poverty, there's a lot of good happening. Please cover that as well. Just like we call the Western media out, we should call our own media out also, right? You can't just say this does not exist, this does not happen, and when you point it out, to be called unpatriotic. Or to be worse, to be booked under the unlawful prevention of activities, to be called a terrorist in your own country for doing your job and pointing out what is reality. And so when they say that no, that is bad and that is fake news, we should ask ourselves, who is promoting what? What is their agenda? It doesn't take as much. And I am the first person to say there is no right agenda or wrong agenda. Just be aware of the agenda. Then make your choice. You know, we can have an ideological spectrum, and it's necessary for us to have that. We can't be a one-tone monochromatic society. But at least let's be aware of what we are consuming, what is being fed to us. Let's not pretend that this is the truth, this is reality. Let's all agree. We all have our own agendas. But at least if we are aware of it and are truthful about it, then we can have a meaningful discussion between two people. We can agree, we can disagree. But if you're going to fake to yourself and not question yourself, then it's like the blind leading the blind. Or worse still, an eye for an eye makes everyone blind. You know, we're not going to listen to each other. We're not going to have a discussion with each other. We're just going to like become the news studio. I speak loudest, you speak loudest. No, I speak louder. So we are all happy. Where is the discussion? Where is the debate? A healthy debate is so important for us. That's the way we learn, that's the way we grow. And as a society, as a country, we need that. We need people supporting the government, we need people against the government. We need people for a cause or against a cause. But that's when the best minds come together to build something. Even our constitution, which we celebrated 2 days ago, was not a consensual document. Our constitution was founded after several debates, heated debates between the constituent members who wrote it. Some wanted some parts in it, someone didn't want in it. But we have one which still exists after so many years. To some extent, it still serves us. If we all, just like, haan mein haan milate hain, as they say, then we are not going to grow. But before we can debate, we need to be informed properly. And that's again, I'm coming back to this whole thing, it's a collective. It's not just the media's fault, the government fault, business fault, our fault. It's like, how are we going to rescue ourselves from this mess that we have got into? And we all have a part to play in it.
Just
Hopeful thinking of pragmatism that you say. What's your take on Vion?
So I don't want to get into individual channels or politicians or...
But also, I don't know to what extent I can conclude, but inconclusively, it gives some objective views without taking sides or something like that. That's why I asked you as a professional.
So to be honest, I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get into individuals or individual outlets.
Okay, just one or 2 points, quick observations. See, I feel, sometimes because I'm an old timer reading newspapers still. Yeah. And, what I feel is, when we start thinking, because, in India, for a long time now, because we are the post-independence generation. And growing up in that age, when there was a middle class that was forming itself as the reading public, as the intelligentsia of the new India that we talk about today, I think, we still looked at news with a lot of trust and, some credibility. And there used to be fights over debates and fights inside families and homes about the news that was being circulated. So what I feel is, it's unfortunate sometimes to see how this middle class reading public has changed over a course of time. This is my observation because of so many factors that have come in. And so now I feel, that when we say we are consuming news, I always I thought of myself as a thinking person, with an agency for change, which unfortunately today we are talking of as consumers, I feel is quite unfortunate, being a reading, belonging to the member of the reading public. The second point I want to make is about technology. I still believe the print media in India is doing its job. This is my personal opinion. And as you rightly pointed out, if readers choose their reading material and focus more on reading, because I stopped watching television during COVID times, because there was too much of politics being played over COVID. And I started focusing only on news, right? So I think this technological change, it has actually brought in a kind of convergence between a lot of interests, including public interest and private interest. And therefore, today we look at business and corporate interests as serving public interest. There is, at least I think among the middle class, I think this is also part of the problem, that we are not able to differentiate between what is private interest and public interest, what is profit making and what is public interest. I think a conscious public, if it emerges, because all of us come from ordinary middle class backgrounds, and yes, and so and our children also belong to that same category, and because I focus on middle class, because this is the class which has not gone into technical education. It has not gone into other professional, this is the class to which the journalists also belong. So I think it's, as you said, dual responsibility on both the public and the journalists to focus on public interest. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Those were two great points, and I wish that there are more people who think like you. Thank you. The one of the biggest issues is that it's like my way or highway, your way, my way. The whole we have a beautiful concept of samvad in our culture, which is like samavada. Let's like have a discourse. Let's have a debate. Let's have an equal debate. That's gone. Now it's like arguments equals debate, which is not the same. A debate has to be informed, but an argument does not have to be informed. And you're rightly it's true. I mean, the middle class now, for good, bad, whatever, is what it is.
Would I be misunderstood if I suggest or request that a speaker may stick on to 3 words at a time so that we can fully follow it? 4 words he uses, the fourth by the time he uses the 4th word, the first word will be forgotten. Just as in the case of Aap and Kejriwal, you may hate him, but you can follow each and every word he speaks. If that is the way a person is gives speech, it can be followed thoroughly. Otherwise, of course, 60 to 80% can follow, of the people, audience can follow it. But for people like me, I cannot follow it.
My apologies, sir. I'll be more careful next time.